Tātad labrīt, cienījamie.
Good morning, everyone.
Dear colleagues and friends, welcome to Latvia and welcome to the Saima of the Republic of Latvia. And I thank you all for joining our discussion today. And since we are all hosting this discussion at the Latvian Parliament as the Speaker of the Saima, I will continue my remarks in Latvian language if you don't mind.
Dear colleagues, friends, today we have a discussion that coincides with the priorities we have set for the Council of Europe. And these priorities reflect our national security interests to strengthen security and resilience in Europe.
The security story of Europe undoubtedly now starts in Ukraine, which has been courageously fighting against the brutal invasion of Russia. They are fighting for the values of all of us. The security of Ukraine is currently the security of the entire Europe. We have understood this for over 2 years, for almost 2 years, since this brutal war has been going on. The selflessness of people here who have been helping Ukraine has also showed and demonstrated the maturity of our society. I can remember very well the 24th of February and the days that followed that, when our citizens were taking a very active role. And now we know that 56% of our population are helping Ukraine on an everyday basis. And the non-governmental organizations are those who have been providing the support to Ukraine, and they have been the driving force of this support. We have also understood the huge force of our NGOs. And this is what we have to continue. We have to continue joining our forces until the entire victory of Ukraine. Whenever it comes and whatever the price, we now have no rights to slow down our support. We can, of course, be satisfied with the activity of our NGOs, but we should not rest on the laurels. The democratic civil society needs to be active, not only before and after the election or during some crisis, but it rather has to be well organized on an everyday basis and to be active in the organization of a state's life. The will of society to implement the sovereign power of the state is very crucial for the resilience of our state as such. Of course, during crisis, emergencies, the powerful NGOs and media are those who help to ensure transparency and the rule of law. Also, because when the entire society is actively involved, we are able to respond to these external challenges to security. On the level of Latvia and Europe, we have to continue investing in the awareness-raising of importance of support of Ukraine when we are protecting the interests of our state. At the same time, the municipalities and the state, as well as the multilateral organizations, also have to find common ways to find new methods to support and to involve society easily and conveniently into this activity. Dear friends and colleagues, I'm really grateful for your huge activity and participation, both in our today's discussion and also in your everyday life. What you are doing day to day is quite often on a voluntary or pro bono basis, just because the situation requires that from you and when you see the fruit of your work. The work of the Saima can also not be imagined without your involvement. This is why we're really trying to make the involvement of non-governmental organizations in the work of the Saima even more convenient. So we are continuing to think about our challenges, using our best practice examples, strengthening our resilience. And I would also like to remind you that the doors of this building will always be open for discussion and for search of the better solutions. Thank you very much, and I wish you very creative discussions. Thank you very much. We are grateful to the Speaker of the Parliament of Latvia for these opening remarks.
And before I give floor to the next speaker, allow me also to say warm welcome on behalf of the Latvian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And we are very happy to see this conference taking place here. A conference that was put together with the efforts of the Latvian Civic Alliance, Latvian Platform of Development Cooperation, the Chancellery of the Republic of Latvia, and with some practical and moral support of the Parliament of Latvia. So I hope you will have a really good discussion throughout the day, because I'm very much looking forward to receive the recommendations of the conference that aims to be developed here, and then further directed to the work of the representatives of Latvia and the Council of Europe structures. And as we are holding the presidency still for a couple of months, there is much to be done, and there is much we can do together. And with this, I give the floor to the next speaker for introductory remarks. And it's our Kristīna Zomberga, Director of the Latvian Civic Alliance. Kristīna, please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'm honored to speak today to you about a topic that is very close to my heart: civil society, democracy, and peace. The concept of civil society is not only an abstract term or an ideal. It is a driving force behind the principles of democracy, social justice, and security. It is also a reality that we can witness in many parts of the world, especially in Ukraine. Ukraine is a country that has faced many challenges and threats to its independence, security, and democracy. Yet, despite these difficulties, Ukraine has also shown remarkable resilience and determination to defend its values. And much of this credit goes to Ukrainian civil society, which has played a crucial role in supporting the democratic transition and social resilience. We can all learn from them. Right now, Europe faces many challenges and risks that requires constant vigilance and action from civil society. This includes the ongoing war in Ukraine, the economic crisis, the post-COVID-19 pandemic, the social polarization, populism, and the disinformation campaigns. Civil society must continue to monitor and pressure government and international organizations to deliver on its promises and obligations to protect democracy. Civil society must also continue to engage and empower the citizens to participate in democratic processes and contribute to common goods. But civil society cannot do this alone. It needs support and solidarity from the international community, especially from democratic countries. Also, today's conference is an example of how stakeholders, civil society organizations, state institutions, donors that share the same values and interests can build partnership with aim to strengthen our democracy. But one of the most inspiring examples of solidarity and friendship between nations is a remarkable contribution of civil society to Ukrainian cause. NGOs and citizens, mostly from Eastern Europe, already since 2014 have mobilized to provide humanitarian, financial, and moral support to Ukraine and its people. They have delivered aid and supplies to Ukrainian armies and voluntaries. They have welcomed and hosted thousands of Ukrainian refugees. They have organized awareness campaigns and fundraising events. They have fostered cultural and educational exchanges. And they have also advocated for Ukraine's European integration. Ladies and gentlemen, civil society has shown that it is not only a key pillar of state, but also a bridge of friendship and cooperation between nations. By supporting civil society in Ukraine, we are not only helping Ukraine's democracy, but also strengthening our own democracy. By supporting civil society in Ukraine, we are not only expressing our solidarity with Ukrainian people, but also strengthening our security and stability in Europe and beyond. And this is the main theme of today's conference. Thank you for your attention, and let's build lasting partnerships for democracy, development, and peace.
Thank you, Christine. And now we are really honored to welcome to the Parliament Director General from Directorate General of Democracy, Human Dignity at the Council of Europe. And it's great to have this opportunity to have the conference keynote speech from Ms. Maria Ruotanen. Please, the floor is yours.
Good morning, dear participants, and thank you very much for the Latvian presidency for this event. As we already heard from the speakers before, it is indeed a very timely and key topic to be discussed. Dear participants, our democracies are not doing well. More than 30 years after the war of the Berlin Wall and the unification of our continent on the basis of our common democratic values, it is dramatically evident that this process was not as inevitable, linear, and irreversible as we had thought at the time. We need to acknowledge that reality, and we must act on this reality. And this is what the fourth summit of the Council of Europe heads of state and governments already said in Reykjavik when they met in May of this year. And I'm really honored to represent now here the Council of Europe and also transmit the message that comes from this conference, and also so that we are actually doing a follow-up immediately. So the words of the heads of states in Reykjavik should not just stay on a declaration, but something that we are doing in the practice every day. As I said in the declaration of the Reykjavik, it was very clear that the civil society action by the Council of Europe in its own activities and also what the member states needs to be reinforced, and it has to be meaningful participation. And also what led to this discussion is that the Secretary General publishes a report every year, what we call the annual report on the state of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in Europe. And again, year after year, it was very clear that the backsliding of democracy and the shrinking space is becoming very, very alarming. Many of the member states of the Council of Europe, they are putting in place legislation and practices which pose a real danger to NGOs and their activities. The ongoing challenges to the legitimacy and capacities of the civil society to represent their work is really causing a threat to the well-being of democracy, to the protection of human rights, and the effectiveness of the rule of law. Because defending our democratic values from backsliding and defending the civic space are two sides of the same coin, actually. Because such democratic backsliding can indeed be seen and even measured. What we see today as democratic backsliding is declining participation in elections, especially by young people, and also diminishing trust in public authorities, in public institutions. And we also see that in many countries, citizens are taking the streets, manifesting, because this is the only way that they feel they can have a say. And often these manifestations turn violent, and those who have been in France during the recent months this year have seen this, how it can really impact the life of every citizen. Already, previous speakers referred to the brutal aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. And I think this has clearly shown once again that lack of democratic safeguards on national authorities is not only threatening our own citizens, but also the stability of international system and peace on our continent. And the Council of Europe, we know very well that civil society is an essential actor to counter this democratic backsliding. Your conference today will be divided into 3 sessions, panels. And the first panel will examine the impact of regional security challenges on the sustainability of democracy. And this is, of course, very topical and legitimate question. But I would also ask the opposite question about the impact of democracy on regional security. We know that democratic countries are less likely to go into war between them. We know that democratic countries respect the will of their citizens, but when a war appears in their country or in the neighboring one, what will this mean to the structures of power, mechanisms of decision-making, and, in the end, to the rights, liberties, and the well-being of all the citizens? The democracy is not just embodied by a constitution, even a perfect one, but it is something which develops through culture and education, through our belief that the place that we live in, the relations that we have with our peers, and the ways in which we can make our opinion known are important and worth protecting, preserving, and promoting. Give me a couple of examples what we are doing at the Council of Europe for further this work. Let me start by the education aspect. The current threats to democracy make it imperative to invest in citizens and development of their competencies to actively engage in democracy. Education gives young people the critical competencies to understand and engage in democracy and defend democratic values when they are under attack. I already mentioned before that we see a really dramatic decline in young people's participation in elections. So I think this is an important aspect. We are now organizing at the Council of Europe in a couple of weeks' time a conference of ministers of education of all the member states of the Council of Europe, and we are adopting a strategy on education which is focusing on learners first, education for today's and tomorrow's society. In this strategy, the member states will be setting forward a vision for the future of education. And it is a key to implement the Reykjavik Declaration and the democratic principles. And it will be hoping to give priority to participation, especially of young people, in democratic life and decision-making processes, including through education on human rights and core democratic values such as pluralism, inclusion, non-discrimination, transparency, and accountability. We know that mathematics and orthography is the most important topics at school, but this is something that we have to put much more focus and accent on. More sustainable long-term process, but something that pays off. The Council of Europe is also pioneering in the area of culture. With the adoption of the European Cultural Convention almost 70 years ago. And it was no coincidence, because already at the time, the leaders recognized that without investing in culture, art, heritage, and history, language learning, and education, no truly and sustainable democratic environment could ever be built. The rights to freedom of expression include academic and artistic freedoms. The Council of Europe has launched the manifesto on the freedom of expression of arts and culture in the digital area in response to the concerns about consistent and varied attacks to freedom of artistic expression in Europe. Also, the vital role of civil society and democracies with the freedom of association remains very challenged, and this is something that the Council of Europe is also putting a lot of focus on. We have seen challenges such as inappropriate limitations to freedom of association and assembly, excessive financial or bureaucratic restrictions on civil society organizations, the politicization of our civil society, and also targeting certain NGOs. And the Council of Europe has been and will continue to be very active in countering these challenges through the case law of the European Convention on Human Rights, as well as other standards set by other instruments and recommendations. And of course, we are very much encouraging all the member states to look at these recommendations and guidance and follow them. And civil society will have even increasing place at the Council of Europe in the years to come. One of the very, I think, fitting event that we are organizing only in two months' time, the World Forum for Democracy, this year's theme will be democracy equals peace, with the big question mark in the end. Your second panel today will be looking at the rising role of local and national level civil societies in multilateral institutions. And indeed, multilateral organizations need only to talk the talk, as we say, but also walk the walk. And we need to be exemplary in the ways in which we involve our colleagues and partners representing civil society. And I'm glad to say that at the Council of Europe, we are moving forward on this front as well. Not only do we have already very active participation of civil society in the what we call the CINCO, in the Conference of Civil Societies, but also we involve civil society in a very active way when we develop standards. And I think yesterday in the warming up session, you already spoke about artificial intelligence, and this is one of the development of civil standard setting that we are involving and listening to civil society when we are developing them. Civil society also plays a very important role when we monitor the effective implementation of our standards. We call shadow reports the reports that we receive from civil society on different conventions that we monitor, and they are extremely valuable, and I have seen many cases where they are also pushing the authorities to move to certain directions and maybe be more, how would I say, more explicit and complete in their reporting on the monitoring that we do. And of course, the third pillar of our action, the cooperation, civil society is key there as well to ensure that our mechanisms are, or our instruments are really well implemented, they are well known and put in place. And I'm thinking of conventions which is very close to my heart, the Violence Against Women, Istanbul Convention. And without the civil society, I don't think this convention maybe would be there. And the way it is now implemented today is, of course, something that the civil society makes a huge difference on the ground. On the Committee of Ministers level, they have, which is the member states' authorities, representative authorities, we have really been taking steps forward as well. And the Secretary General is actually organizing on Friday this week the first what she will maybe make an annual or regular conference where she meets the civil society of all the Council of Member States, representatives of civil society, to discuss together with them different ways of enhancing our work. We have a lot of expectations for this, and I hope that many of you who are sitting here will also be participating, but I think this is also something that we want to really show that we are listening to civil society, not only how to make the Reykjavik principles more into practice, but in many other areas as well. And then lastly, your third panel will discuss social resilience as a tool for inclusion, safe and sustainable local communities. And this is something that the Council of Europe has also been working for a long time. Sustainable communities are those where people want to live in and work now and in the future. And we have a program, for example, which we call Intercultural Cities, which brings together cities and regions and share information and experience between them, how through intercultural lens and developing comprehensive intercultural strategies, they can make their societies much more positive to live in. And lastly, I would like to mention the schools of political studies, which is something that we have at the Council of Europe for many years, and the vital role that they also play in a way preparing and developing young leaders for the future political activities that they might want to take. But I don't want to finish this introductory speech without mentioning again the youth and the important role that they make in our societies and also in making our institutions more sustainable. Supporting the participation of young people in democratic life is a key for democratic future, that everyone is able to play their role in democratic processes, as stressed also again in the Reykjavik principles. And the young people, they are also agents of change, and the youth civil society play a very important role in this perspective, and we have to support them. We have been offering a platform at the Council of Europe for a long time to allow young people to express their opinions, their needs, and we have a co-management system with the young in this respect. And the inclusion of young people in listening also to standard-setting work is getting increasingly important. We want to make sure that they sit in all the different committees where we develop standards, and also in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe there is a work underway to see how young could be heard, not only when the report is only focusing on young, but when it concerns any aspect of the Council of Europe work. So I think this is also a signal that we are maybe moving, hopefully, to the right direction. Dear participants, the lesson we must draw from the past is that democracy can never be taken for granted. But I would like to leave you with another thought. If the progress of democracy is never irreversible, neither, and even less so, is its decline. We will overcome the present threats, but it will take a lot of work, and the contribution from civil society is very important for this to realize. Thank you very much, and I hope you have an excellent conference.
Thank you for these fantastic introductory speeches. I guess we have some food for thoughts and some more questions on our minds, right? And I'm very happy to start the first panel. But let me first tell some practical things. Probably you all are eager to ask questions, right? So there are two ways how you can do it. One is Slido. Many of probably participants are well aware about this mechanism, and you will see moment to moment the code. So if you go in slido.com, you can enter the code, and then you can ask questions immediately when you know them. But if you want to say them later in person, there will be also a possibility. But I, of course, cannot promise that everybody will be able to ask a question. So let's see how it goes. And if you will want to ask a question yourselves, there is a mic in front of everyone, so you can just check it, you have it. First panel about the impact of regional security and multiple crises on the sustainability of democracy. So full-scale invasion by Russia in Ukraine was mentioned, but actually we recently recovered from COVID-19. In Latvia, we saw these brutal attacks by illegal president of Belarus to its own people, and we were receiving here civil society as well as in Lithuania and other countries. We saw how human, and still actually, how we have pushbacks at our borders. So humans are used actually as weapons in this region. And so therefore we see that there is actually multiple crises, not just the one which is maybe no more on agenda for every politician. Some of them are not on agendas of politicians. So at the same time, as it was mentioned, we had unprecedented number of people who were standing up for the cause and also agility of the government. But what we saw as a civil society was actually lack of transparency in the processes, in decision-making procedures, in justice also. We had limited freedom of speech and smear campaigns against civic activists and journalists, and there have been on agenda regulations about so-called foreign agents. So many issues where we can see actually democracy decreasing. So let's. I want to be actually in this panel quite provocative and even ask, are we in war for democracy, or we already have given up democracy for what we fight for, you know? So it's quite conceptual question. So we will have today very distinguished panel. Unfortunately, our colleague from Georgia was not able to catch the plane. The plane was not catching her, it was delayed to today. So therefore we will, she's participating online, and we are very happy, and we have 3 panelists here. I will be very strict timekeeper for the first round, only 5 minutes for everyone, and then we will have interaction with an audience, and then we will have several other rounds, so I hope we will manage. So, do we have Anna online? Can you, yeah?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do. So, first speaker, Anna, who is Apacari, who is a legal advocacy officer and project coordinator at the Equality Movement. So, your 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. As mentioned, I could not reach to Riga, but I'm still very honored to address the conference and discuss the crisis we are now facing in Georgia. The country, as once was seen as a model for democratic transition among a former Soviet-occupied state and a leader of democracy and reforms in the Eastern Partnership. But currently the situation has changed dramatically, and what we see now is that democracy has regressed over the past few years. But ironically enough, the situation has dramatically changed since Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine. And as mentioned, as you already mentioned, we've seen many problems regarding democratic backsliding. And what we see in the past few months is the attempts of changing the legislation and adopt legislative changes that are similar to what Russia currently has. And the most dramatic moment was probably in the past February, when the parliament started discussing a so-called Russian-style role of foreign agent, which would have forced any non-governmental organization, independent media outlets, and even religious organizations that received over 20% of their funding from foreign entities to register as foreign agents. So this draft law aimed to, first of all, to marginalize any civil rights organization and independent media agents, because the word agent in Georgian is similar to spy. So the purpose of this draft law was to label anyone who criticized the government or express information, objective information, as spies. And also the law would grant the Ministry of Justice with the power to investigate and obtain any forms of documents from the civil society organizations. And in the Georgian context, basically all the civil society organizations, including my organization, provide different services to the most vulnerable people. So with this legislation, the state would have the possibility to have access to any form of personal data, and we highly believe that the state would use this to control people, especially the most vulnerable and marginalized group of our society. So what happened was that the parliament started discussing this draft law, and even it was adopted by its first hearing. But actually, the civil society organization started a strong campaign against this law. What happened, first of all, was that as the government wanted to label us as foreign spies, we labeled this draft law as Russian law. So the people started protesting against the law, and the mass protest started in the beginning of the March, and at the very interesting opening of this conference, the role of youth generation was emphasized, and this protest was also known as Gen Z protest. Gen Z is a generation that was born in the late 90s, and the majority of the protesters were young. So as a result of this mass protest, the parliament was actually forced to draft this law. However, despite this tiny success, we highly believe that this was just the beginning. So what was happened after? So first of all, during these protests, more than 130 people were detained, and as a result of police forces, one man actually lost an eye, and several more were physically damaged. And the police actually used gas during the protest, and many people were poisoned as a result. And as mentioned, we believe that this was just the beginning. What I mean by that is that we see that the parliament is going to discuss some other legislation that are similar to what Russia has now and what Russia brought to the position where it is today. For instance, the currently so-called propaganda law is registered in the parliament. This proposed law prohibits manifestation that demonstrates or propagates or promotes sexual orientation. It also prohibits manifestation that opens religious feelings, and also manifestation and propagates war and violence. First of all, as known, so-called anti-LGBT legislation is kind of used as a tool by Russia, and that's what we see now: marginalization of LGBTQI community and other most vulnerable group. And also, for those who watch Georgia, it is seen as one of the one of the biggest supporter of Ukraine, and we have one of the largest pro-Ukrainian rallies since the Russia's invasion. And we highly believe that this proposed legislation also targets this protest, as every time we gather to support Ukraine, the government and its proxy groups label this protest as propagation of war and violence. And we believe that that's what this proposed law promotes. And we also have this ongoing conversation over this criminalization on defamation. So as mentioned, the foreign agents law aimed to stop NGOs and independent media from operating in the country. And as this law was dropped, now the criminalization of defamation is realistic, and we believe that if the parliament start discussing such legislation and it will be adopted, it will target again the non-governmental organization, especially the organizations working on corruption and observe the elections, and also online media and other independent media outlets. So
Okay.
as mentioned,
Yeah. So the time is running up. Sorry to say.
Yeah, so I can stop here and I'm going to continue.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I think, we feel your situation in a way, right? Because if so many things are going on at the same time, it's really threatening democracy. And we heard that civil society is foundation of the state, but now we see that state and parliament is attacking civil society in your country, right? Ivo, you have been working in several countries yourself also, right, in the region. And what will be your point on this overall situation and also the role of the government, which we see is not working anymore for democracy or for society good, but yeah, we heard.
Yeah, no, it's pretty complex thing, and I think additional moment is really this crisis aspects which are overcoming and issues related to crisis resilience, and I think that's part I wanted also to discuss, because especially in those moments when you are getting into crisis, you see how resilient is government, how resilient is civil society. So therefore, especially those moments, you see the most weakest parts, and definitely the only thing what is possible really to do is just to keep working on strengthening civil society, and meanwhile both from support of international community and promoting these local initiatives, and with time when you get more of normalization, put more of aspects really to make also the government more crisis resilient and put these standards, so you cannot kind of use such opportunities or moments to kind of disrupt it and change. So I would say we have to talk more on this resilience building in terms of civil society and government.
You want to continue with your points?
Just if it's questions, I answer.
No. It's yeah.
Okay, I can go on.
You probably have a.
I just smoothly will go on with my part, and I wanted really to cover all these regional aspects on challenges for democracy, and I think really what was raised, and it's important that we discuss these days the polycrisis thing, yeah, and it's polycrisis is something where you get a couple of crises in parallel ongoing, and here we just, if you look in the past, we just don't talk only about like COVID and so on, the Russian war against Ukraine, but subsequently we got all the energy crisis, ongoing food security issues, and so. And this basically puts a big pressure both to government and civil society. So basically having this lack of crisis resilience basically shows limitations of power, so it allows creates situations where government make work on this democratic backsliding. You get more of this support for populism ongoing, stronger control and leadership over democracy, shifts and decision-making, transparency issues, limitation of access of information, and you get disinformation, misinformation waves. So it's very kind of sensitive environment for that. And I think one of essential moments what we have to also discuss is about trust in society and greater trust in government. So basically, just if you look just for OECD trust surveys from 2021 and recent, we can just see that the trust levels into governments has decreased, and also it's a case also for 2004 enlargement countries, including Latvia, which also made constrained also civil society, media, and information transparency. And this again relates to the issues the governments may tighten control over this civil society organizations and media outlets. For this, so this is a kind of critical indicator for that. And again, if you look for instance, also the Latvian case that recently we can see the parliament, for instance, initiated, but to great thanks to civil society, resilience didn't adopt like initial legislation adjustments, allowing to make any information of limited availability as a state secret. And also there is issues, limited possibilities for mass media and NGOs to see what's happening with migrants on border with Belarus. So therefore, this systematic communication is very important. And as previously mentioned, once you have this crisis resilience, you can better monitor and tackle these situations. Otherwise, it's very convenient for excuse like crisis as a moment just not to act or limit decision making and so. And finally, it puts also a link to government, how the government might tackle these changes. And here we talk about how to create more resilient, crisis-resilient governments with all the systems in place, how to not to lose the standards for consultation process and good decision-making process, how to work on simplifying, for instance, decision-making process and methods for public participation. Again, like run referendums on local government level. So basically keeping this window of opportunity also for civil society to participate and in policy development. So basically this is a kind of standards which should not fall out when you get like these crisis moments. And what we see again in experience, for instance, in Latvia, definitely certain aspects of resilience shows that how society can mobilize in case of crisis, like with Ukrainian refugees and also providing support for Ukraine. So it's kind of one of indicators how in crisis situations society can mobilize. It's kind of also indicator of kind of good democratic values and resilience. And finally, the international community. Again, usually international communities has been kind of carrot and stick principle, and sometimes external pressure has always worked well for countries to develop also in region, especially those who are more on the path of better democracy, and especially it relates to monitoring of the process of democracy, supporting, raising awareness. So still, I think this part of international communities remains very important in region, particular countries like Georgia, Ukraine, Moldova. So building this civil society and keeping resilience ongoing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And yes, in theory, you're right, yeah. Right? But now let's move to experience of Finland. How is it in Finland in practice? Because Finland is usually said to be a very good example who is setting high standards actually for government work with civil society. But do you also face democracy challenges, and how do you tackle them?
Yes, thank you. I think it's yes, we face challenges always, and I think it's very important that now that we are talking about exceptional circumstances and the war going on, that we will remember that this is very important now, but it's also important when the normal times come back to continue. So I think even now, even though it's very difficult now, I think it's very important to keep the focus also on the future, so that we don't kind of think that, okay, done. The democracy work, I think in Finland, one thing that would describe us that we are always worried. I think situation is good in Finland, but we are always worried and we always try to be better. And there's a lot to do in Finland as well. When it comes to Finland, I think one of the important things, there is always a government program, which is the most important document, steering document in the Finnish administration. And there is always something about democracy. Now it's even stronger. I give you some couple of sentences of direct quote. We just got a new government, and in the current government program it says, a strong and committed country, strong democracy and an independent state governed by the rule of law. Everyone is valued as an equal member of the society. A democratic society relies on people being heard to take part and be heard. People being able to take part and be heard. The government will strengthen democracy, participation and trust in society, and open and interactive governance bolsters citizens' trust in public authorities. So this is one very important thing, that it is the tone from the top. It's in the government program. It's said that this is very important. It also says in the government program that there will be a democracy program. We've had democracy programs also in the previous government, so this is good continuum of these specific programs, trying to make our institutions still more resilient, still more better. But also, and here I come to my own subject because it's closest to my heart and that's where I'm the best to talk about, because the democracy program of the current government is not yet there, so I cannot tell yet what there is. We know that there will be emphasis on young people, but it's being just planned and drafted. But we are going to publish our open government plan on the 5th of October. And when we talk about open government, often people think that it's access to information, maybe a little bit of participation, maybe some other issues. In Finland, we have 8 areas of open government where we do work. And one of the important areas of open government work is government as an enabler. So we want to be better as a government in many areas, in participation, easy language, open data and so forth. But we also want to help and strengthen the civil society. And there we ordered a civics-based report from the OECD, which tells that, yes, Finland is doing well, but yes, there is a lot to do. And what we are aiming at in this new open government program, it goes to the issues that have already been mentioned, trust and participation, but we want to emphasize the dialogue in the society. We're organizing dialogues together with the civil society, not by the government alone, but civil society actors, and government together organizing dialogues. We have this national dialogues model, and there is very good, nice cooperation with Latvia here too coming. So we have this national dialogues model, and the idea is that through those dialogues organized by the civil society organizations, municipalities, different, it is possible for everybody's voice to be heard. And this is a very important thing for us, and I'm very enthusiastic, maybe over-enthusiastic about these dialogues, because finally I think we have a method where we can hear those who are the weakest in the society. So this is one important thing in our open government program. But also one important thing is the dialogue between civil society and civil servants. We know that civil servants in Finland value civil society organizations, but do they know enough about what civil society organizations are doing? We figured no, and therefore there was this idea from the civil society side to organize a Civil Society Academy Day, and we've organized now 6. It's a day where basically training for civil servants so that they know better what is the current role of civil society organizations in Finland, how that role evolves, what is coming, but also dialogue, networking with the civil society organizations. And we're strengthening this by making it also regional, so not just on national level, but also regional level. So this is, and also e-training to civil servants being right now made available to all civil servants to understand better what is civic society in today's world. But then one important thing that actually comes from the dialogues, when the war started, Russian aggression started, we started together with the civil society democracy defense dialogues. And it was already mentioned here that democracy is of course about institutions, it's about culture, but it's also a way of life. And based on the results of these democracy defense dialogues, there's going to be a published democratic encounters handbook by the end of this month, where we are trying to take this democracy as a way of life to our public services. So when our public services encounter citizens, civil society organizations, they encounter them with respect, with listening, with an attitude that's a democratic attitude, because we really feel that this democracy is something that happens in each of us in our daily lives. And then in our open government program, we will also have other things, for instance, mis and disinformation, how we can there too, not just the government, but together with the whole society, work better in this mis and disinformation. And one particular thing that has been close to our heart for a long time in Finland, which we're still trying to be better at, is the easy language, because we think that information is not really open if you cannot understand it. And we've been trying to have clear language campaigns for a long time, but now we know we have to concentrate even more on the easy language, which is even more simpler version of Finnish, because 14% of Finnish people actually need this easy language, and it helps everybody. And I think that at the core of the democracy is the participation, getting your voice heard, but you cannot do that if you don't understand what it's all about. So here briefly what things that we are trying to do at the moment. Thanks.
Thank you. Very inspirational as always, and democracy as way of life sounds, I think, a very good slogan and understandable, but actually with very deep meaning. Yeah, let's zoom out a little bit, right? Many have mentioned already multilateral institutions, carrots and sticks, even so. Please, Mr. Michael Flaherty, can you please tell your opinion? What was the impact of this Russia's aggressive invasion in Ukraine from your perspective on multilateral institutions and civil society?
Thank you very much. Good morning. Thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate being here. Look, let's be clear. The Russian aggression is extraordinarily consequential. It's an existential threat for our Europe. You get that the minute you arrive in this city. You see the ships, the naval ships out there in the harbour. My hotel is full of foreign soldiers. So you don't need to be reminded when you come to this part of Europe, but it's all of Europe. Everything that we built after the Second World War is under threat. And if Russia succeeds, then the entire modern European project will have failed. It's that consequential. And that's why I get it. I understand why countries feel the need to securitize. I'm going to come back in a moment to the elements of a rule book for securitization, but I will not oppose the sense that we have to make our societies safer in this extraordinary moment. But as Maria said earlier, you put it very well, the safest societies are the democratic societies that stand up for human rights. And so, in a curious way, the more democratic, the more human rights respectful you make your society, the more secure it is, the more capable it is of countering the Russian and other aggressions. This is not just wishful thinking. There's research on this. UNDP last year published findings regarding African countries where it showed that the more human rights respectful a country of the ones it examined, the more safe it was from for instance, terrorist threats. Let's give you an ad contrarium argument. Russia would not behave the way it's behaving today if it hadn't eroded its own society, if it hadn't undermined its NGO sector, if it hadn't corroded its democratic institutions, it would be unthinkable that Putin could behave the way he behaves today. And so let's keep that in mind. Now, I said security strategies are legitimate. What's the rule book? Well, maybe before the rule book, just a word on disinformation. It is rampant. It is vast. We don't even appreciate on a day-to-day basis the extent to which it's invading our lives. And so therefore all of us, our governments, civil society, must focus on tackling disinformation in a sustained way at the same scale as the disinformation peddlers. And we're not doing that. But second, as we tackle disinformation, as our states tackle it, and all the other elements of the threats, they seek to limit rights. And that's actually okay. Very few rights are absolute. Yeah, I have a right not to be tortured, a right not to be summarily executed. But most rights are subject to limitation in the public good. And so the question is, what is the rule book for the limiting of rights? And here we have to do a much better job of holding our governments accountable according to the principles of legality. Is the limitation based on law? Necessity. Is the limitation necessary to serve a public good? Is it proportionate in terms of what it's seeking to achieve? Is it non-discriminatory in how it's applied? Now, we can come back to this later if you like, but all of this needs to be rigorously applied and very closely monitored by civil society. Another dimension of being careful in securitization of our states is to avoid unintended consequences of otherwise good measures. Now, we heard from the speaker online just now of very intended consequences, but often we find around Europe it's an accident. NGOs get caught somehow in the headwind of an initiative that has a legitimate purpose of, for example, tackling money laundering or avoiding corruption in public office, and the careless definitions that are used in the law catch legitimate organisations. So we have to be very vigilant there. And look, just before I stop, migration was mentioned, and I wasn't intending to talk about this, but I really want to. Look, what Lukashenko is doing and what Belarus is doing on our borders is deeply cynical and evil and nasty. But it doesn't mean that the unfortunate people shoved across the borders it doesn't mean that they're not innocent people. I've met people who've tried to cross the Belarus border. I've been on the Belarus border now in 2 countries, not this country. I've been on the border in 2 countries. I've met the people trying to get across. Who is this 70-year-old woman that I met? Is she a terrorist? Are these young gay boys who are trying to escape from their country, are they terrorists? It's utter nonsense. Don't be taken up by that disinformation. These are migrants entitled to the same rights as any other migrant. The right to life, the right not to die in a forest, not to drown in a river, the right to seek asylum. You may not get asylum because you have to qualify for it, but at a minimum the right to seek asylum. And our societies are better than, they're better than the common denominator that's being pushed right now. Our countries will thrive if they have borders that have doors in them so that those who are entitled and need international protection can pass through. So let's use that as a litmus test for the quality of our democracies.
Thank you, and I think I had one question in my mind before, but I will ask a question from Slido, so you can also prepare to ask questions. We have 2 questions on Slido, but responding a little bit on this, when Anna was making her point, I was thinking, yes, it's very strange in a way, right? I think we in civil society feel it that sometimes you are kind of Russia, all liberals now are for Russia, which is, in a way, very strange concept, but it's happening in Latvia. But as Anna said, for example, at the same time, they can use the argument of Russia for good for civil society to say that we don't need such a law as in Russia. So I think we use the word Russia everywhere now, wherever we want, but does it have any context or real context, or it's just naming any enemy we want as this Russia's hand? But talking about this, I think you mentioned very good points that actually if we limit some rights, we need to understand why we limit, right? What's the cause, what's the consequence, and so. And we have a question about 3 characteristics what would confirm that civil society is resilient. So what would be that standard minimum? But we could say this is where we don't go further. This is the standard minimum that civil society is alive in our country, so we cannot reduce these rights. Anybody can respond. Yeah, sure.
First, I want to react to what you said first. Let's not blame Russia for everything, and let's not transfer the responsibility to another state. What's happening is happening. I've said it already, but let's recall the extent to which we were eroding our own civil society space long before Ukraine was invaded in 2014. We've been following the situation of civil society for years now at the Fundamental Rights Agency, and we've seen these pressures in a sustained way in many countries. It's not just in one particular corner of Europe. The regulatory pressure, the excessive regulatory pressure, the excessive financial pressure, the foreign funding issue, for instance, the lack of access to decision makers, and in too many places direct physical threats to people and to property. So remember, we have our own problems to fix regardless of this aggression, and if, by the way, the aggression is vanquished, we'll still have these issues that we'll have to tackle. But I've forgotten your actual question.
The minimum, yes, that's very, hot issue. You always to respond. That's true, and thank you for responding on that. I wanted to move on more neutral, let's say, question about three characteristics.
Okay,
three.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, the reason I forgot it is because I think I already answered it. Look, the rule book, the minimum standards is the Human Rights Code. It's as simple as that. We don't have human rights for one purpose and not for another purpose. Civil society is as entitled to and is as in need of respect for human rights as the migrants I just spoke about. And so that's the rule book. Let's not invent new rule books, because the danger is every time you invent a new rule book, you dump down the standard. Now, we're in the 75th anniversary year of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. If human rights is confusing, complex, too much stuff, too many different topics, just go zero in on that tiny little document with its 20-something articles. Use that as the rule book. Demand that authorities are held account by that, and that's enough.
Anna, I would like to ask this question also to you. You are now experiencing extremely shrinking space in Georgia. What would be your points, what you would say no further go by government or parliament? Of course, we all want to experience democracy in its fullest, but still, what would you say? What's the red line for you?
Well, first of all, as mentioned, we see that all this democratic backsliding is basically happening on the legislative level. That's what we're facing. And in regard of this legislative changing, the problem here is that our parliament is becoming more and more close for the civil society and in general for the society, and even the new rules are represented by the parliament, according to which it's even become incredibly hard to reach to the government building. So that's why we need to that's why majority of us usually stand outside the parliament. So that's the only way to reach our voices to the government. And even when it comes to the processes which are formally inclusive and open for the civil society organizations, we see that we do not have any voice in this process. For instance, in the past 2 years, Georgia, the government of Georgia and the Parliament of Georgia adopted few main strategy documents like human rights strategy and gender equality concept document, and those processes were formally inclusive. Some civil society organizations were involved in this process. However, the final documents were adopted without participation of civil society organization. And what we saw in this document was that, first of all, those documents are not inclusive. They are very formal, and as mentioned, what currently the government of Georgia is trying to do is to adopt Russian-like legislation and policies, and those documents are also good examples of this, as those documents tries to remove gender from Georgia's human rights agenda, and even gender equality was defined as equality between men and women. That was the first time that happened in Georgia. So I don't know if it answers your question, but Georgia has absolutely different problems from what was discussed, and our main problem is that we cannot engage these processes. So that's why people protest outside the government and the parliament buildings.
Thank you, Anna. We have quite a lot already questions on Slido, but maybe somebody wants to ask in person, even if you wrote. But there is also a special thanks to Mr. O'Flaherty on the comments on migrations. That is the test of our democracies and societies. So audience highly appreciates your remarks. So maybe somebody wants to ask in person. Yes, please. And,
Thank you for a very insightful, serious addressing of these issues. I would like to bring some issues that perhaps have been talked about, but I'm looking for solutions to some of these issues. For example, we talk about democracy, and I want to know about what is the definition of democracy for governments, for each one of you, because I think there are various definitions of what democracy is. I mean, we have some general understanding, follow the rule of law, the ones that are generally accepted. But specifically, what is it that is applicable in today's world, which is fragmented, uncertain, fast-changing global developments with rampant disinformation, and the issue of human rights and economic rights. So what form of democracy can best handle these things? Is it the one that we've always thought? I mean, we know democracy is different between many different countries. So what is it that we really want? I think a precise definition, perhaps for each country, is more important. Furthermore, in a complex environment where we have really, really complex issues across a board of developments, the issue of education comes in mind. How many people can really understand the complexity of the issues today and be able to vote in a perhaps more precise, understandable way? I believe these are really serious issues that we need to talk about, and therefore, what does that mean for example, representation and democracy, or one vote per person as we understand today? And as technology is developing and becoming more and more complex, how do we address the issues there, which can be circumvented by, and this is something that we haven't really addressed, human behavior, greed, corruption, nefarious actors that can sabotage any of these things, especially when technology is becoming very, very powerful and potentially very destructive into almost in terms of existential threat for humanity. And again, that comes down to conflicts between individuals, between powerful interest groups, different interests of governments, international organizations. How do we find a balance there between these different interests? And are those balances that we come to, as we've seen in various countries, including the US, by the way, can we find a balance that benefits all of the people? Or is it just special interests that are driving this?
Okay.
And finally, I'm sorry it's taking long, but these are serious issues, and I don't know if there are any real answers to it. But I just want to raise the issues and get your responses for the benefit of the audience and myself as well. The issue of biases, discrimination, application of laws, especially in global climate change and immigration. So it's one thing to have these ideas, aspirational talks, which we've had, but the implementation of these, as we've seen in many countries around ourselves, is a different issue.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We had another hand, so let's take calls. And then, please.
Sorry, good morning. My name is Harry Hummel. I work in the campaign to uphold rights in Europe, which is focusing on strengthening the rule of law and human rights and democracy related work of the Council of Europe. This implies that we think that improvements are possible, in the impact of the Council of Europe on these concepts. And I would like to take a very practical approach. We heard the story from Georgia. Then we heard from Maja Ruotanen in the keynote speech that there will be a conference of ministers of education in a couple of weeks' time in Strasbourg. And my question is, can these things be linked? What will happen with the Georgian Minister of Education who comes to this conference? Will he or she be able to just be there and, go back home, maybe having signed a nice declaration, but without any real impact on the situation in the country, on the education policies? Will there be, a way to involve? Is there a way to involve directly trade unions of teachers, civil society organizations who deal with civic education in Georgia in this conference? And is there a way to, in a way, confront the Georgian reality with the niceties of a conference in Strasbourg of ministers of education? This question obviously is not only about Georgia. There are a whole series of countries where you can assume that in essence, the government is talking the talk, but is not walking the walk. They are in principle, behind all the nice values of the Council of Europe, but in practice, their policies are directed towards also other purposes. And how does the Council of Europe, and with the assistance of civil society, I think, which is needed, safeguard against this danger?
Okay, thank you. And we had one more hand, and then we will stop for a while, okay?
Yes,
Justina,
hello, Justina from Lithuania. I have a very practical question also on security, defense, and civil society. So, as mentioned, during this multiple crisis, also the civil society focus and interest in armed or unarmed defense and security arose. If you could share some examples of the best practices you've seen or the challenges you faced and basically involving civil society or citizens in security and defense programs, initiatives, in the same time, not only for resilience building, but also for the same trust and understanding which was mentioned. Thank you.
Okay, and then we also had several questions on Slido, but let me divide the time we have left for now. We will see how it goes, but in two parts. So I have one more comment I want to read in the context, actually, what has been raised before about the Finland. So there is a comment that anti-democratic, discriminatory and anti-rights speeches have been heard from Finland's current ministers and government members in the past and recently. So how can national administration credibly uphold its own values of democracy and human rights if such rhetoric is used even at the government level? So not just, as it was raised, about these multilateral institutions, let's say, commenting on these ministers which adopt resolutions but actually act in reality differently, but how it's the life of civil servant in such circumstances also. So this can be added. But, and then we will talk about more concrete suggestions in the next round. Okay, so now maybe some of these conceptual, theoretical feeling answers. So Ivo, maybe you want to.
Yeah, thanks. A lot of questions, but I will not answer to all, but
sure.
I will give my story and then so. And yeah, I have some experience over 15 years working also in Eastern European countries, Moldova, Georgia, Ukraine, Armenia, and Western Balkans, and definitely when we talk about civil society, I have seen many interesting experiences in the ways how the democracy is evolving. Definitely one of particular aspects that many governments, what they are trying to do is just they build their framework legal very nicely, but it's usually not enforced, and then you get in very absurd situations where formally you have many regulatory processes in place, but things are not working in practice. And at that point, definitely this big question is how to raise this kind of awareness and capacity, basic awareness both in political level and civil society on the true meaning of this democratic values role of civil society. And there are a number of things really, like how to enforce like access to information, role in decision-making process, opportunities for civil society development, and finally freedom of expression. And it again leads to kind of indicator of trust levels, yeah, because it's a very good indicator to what level as higher you have trust, as better opportunity for civil society involvement it will be in the process. In this case, it's also very important for a number of countries, what I initially mentioned, this international arm of support, and definitely that it's not kind of very theoretical, formalized, bureaucratic, but really straight to the need. And definitely we should talk much about this support for awareness raising and capacity building for these communities. In this case, you can build this dialogue. And definitely when we go into this issue about technologies and different voting issues, and again, stronger we got this civil society initiatives developed as more like this community-based interests, starting with lower level, they are initiated and then people are participate, at least they put their initial interest into focus and get on their micro level resolved, and with step-by-step building this bigger picture, because once we talk about these big things, democracy and so, we have to really kind of measure it. And definitely one of true ways is this local level of interaction, which builds this value thing and doing society right things and building more of awareness on both political and civil service level, which is essential. And regarding balance of interest, definitely it will be always a crucial thing, and not always it will be possible, I think, to balance, but as soon as civil society is now strong and it can kind of implement those micro initiatives in that context, and they are not suppressed, but at least at minimum supported on government level, we can say we are getting some progress also in terms of democracy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yes, maybe 2 points. One is to this complex environment and the education and the complexity of issues today and how can citizens participate. Actually, there was a trust review made of Finland by the OEC, and one of the findings in that trust review was that there is this Finnish paradox that Finnish people trust the government, but they don't trust their own capacity or capability to participate, and they don't trust that it has an impact, or that trust was lower than in the neighboring countries. And this is why we were looking for, so you wanted answers on how to do that, on what concrete, well, we are not there yet, but the idea of the dialogues is that in these dialogues, these people can discuss how they feel about these issues. They don't have to kind of find solutions or concretely tell about these issues. They, for instance, now we are organizing about communities and encounters, and we organized during the springtime on what it is like to live in uncertain times. But these dialogues, when they discuss about how they feel, they also kind of increase this joint understanding of these subjects. And we feel that that's one. These dialogues are not going to replace anything else. It's an add-on to others, and we need also other things to freshen our democracy, like deliberative democracy and so forth. But then to the other question that was particularly about Finland, I quoted the government program, and you could see that's the steering document. And in the government program, the government is really committed to these principles. There's a lot more text than I quoted. So in that way, as a civil servant, I'm confident that there is this is the way to go. The government is committed. The points that were mentioned were before these people or the things that they have said were or referred to were before they were ministers. So what we are looking is them as a government, as ministers, and now the government has also given out a government report or a government decision on strengthening equity and fighting racism. So that's a very important, and the Prime Minister has said that he himself will lead this work, so it's in the Prime Minister's office. But we also have of course, we have in the government, in the civil servants, we have these core values that we are extremely committed to. There are 10 of them. There is values in your daily life. We always have this daily life. So there's a handbook on what these mean in practice. But what I think is also important that of course, that we are to our integrity and ethics and do as we have committed to these values, but we also measure this. We asked the citizens, we just asked last year, how do the citizens think we are doing vis-a-vis these values? And this year we are going to ask, or at the beginning of next year, we're going to ask the civil servants, how do they see these values are represented in our administration? So we also have to check and measure all the time, all of these issues, not just these values, but also the civic space and forth. So I think we are doing well in the values of the civic service in Finland, so don't worry.
Okay.
Thank you. I'd like to respond particularly to the gentleman there who spoke first. Firstly, democracy. I don't have a problem defining democracy. For me, democracy is at its best when it has the human at its heart, when it serves and honours the dignity of every human in our society. That's for me the test of democracy. I'm completely relaxed with different models of democracy. Fine, let Switzerland have its own peculiar form as opposed to whatever is here and in my own country. But if the human is at the heart, then that works for me. And when I say the human, for sure it's all of us. But it's also the most marginal, the most forgotten, the person on the periphery. If you can see that your government is standing up for the Roma in your country, then I think probably democracy is in good shape. Now, I was a bit, you challenged me because you kind of suggested we were being a bit aspirational up here. And I don't think we are at all. I think we're very concrete. You heard from Finland about very specific things that are happening for the good. In the areas I mentioned, I also see change. Take migration. It's a huge challenge, but there are improvements. 8 years ago, when I went to camps on Greek islands, I saw children in cages. It's unthinkable today. Today, those children are in homes under guardianship. It would be unthinkable 8 years ago that you would have human rights monitors on the European borders. They're there now. The Frontex agency has radically transformed itself in the last few years to carry out this function. On the border between Croatia and Bosnia, there's now an independent monitoring system, and we believe that could be rolled out more widely. I could go on, but time isn't with me. Well, I will go on if you like. Tech, you mentioned the burgeoning technology and all the risks that are there. Sure, I get it and I agree with you. But the regulation also is moving well. We're doing a really good job in Europe of putting in place the necessary regulatory controls. The Digital Services Act, which came into effect a couple of weeks ago. The AI regulation, which will be adopted very soon. Okay, they could be better. The negotiation's not over for AI, but it's going in a good direction in terms of protecting humans and their dignity in the rollout of the technology. Now, where I would agree with the gentleman is with regard to education. We do need to invest far more in the subject that when I was a kid we called civics. It has actually disappeared in many of our schools. As a result, we're not giving kids the necessary skill sets to navigate complex modern democracies. So I'm not an educator, I'm not a government official, but to the extent you can get the message to Ministry of Education, resuscitate civics, or whatever you want to call it. I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna, would you like to respond to any of the questions?
Yes, thank you. I would like to respond to the second question on the education. So first of all, to begin with, Georgia is the only country in the neighborhood where we have the highest number of children living in poverty and children who do not have access to education, both preschool and school education. And according to the recent study by UNICEF, the study shows that 55% of Georgian children do not have access to at least one education item they would like to have. And does the state have enough resources to respond to this question, to these problems? Of course it does. But what we say is that the state has this policy. The state wants to maintain the situation, and not only the state do not want to adopt a real reform, real education reform, but as mentioned, the state has this policy, and the situation in rural areas of Georgia is even worse. And when we talk about the rural areas of Georgia, we should also take into consideration that we have rural areas in Georgia which are mainly populated by ethnic minorities like Azerbaijani and Armenian minorities, and those minorities exercise their mother language, Armenian, Azerbaijani, which is protected by the Constitution of Georgia. However, as the state language in Georgia is Georgian, administrative and any form of state official language of any state authorities is Georgian, and the problem here is that majority of Azerbaijani and Armenian people do not speak Georgian, and that is also state's clear policy, because the state wants to weaponize these communities, as we see this especially during elections, when the ruling party always wins elections in these rural areas that are populated by the Armenian and Azerbaijani communities. And in regard of the Minister of Education, and if he's actually willing to change something, so the interesting thing here is that actually the current Minister of Education was appointed after March protest that was against the agent law. And this person, Georgi Amilahwari, was the chair of the Committee of Education of the Parliament, and he was the person who voted in favor of this draft law. And as I mentioned at the beginning of my speech, this protest also was known as Gen Z protest, because young people resisted the most during this process. And after this process, as mentioned, he was appointed as a minister, and he started controlling education system, as afterwards the man who was linked to the current ruling party was appointed as a rector of Tbilisi State University, which is the first university of Georgia and also the largest education system. And they also want to change the rectors of other state universities. So if it responds to your question, the man was just appointed to control all the state institutions and especially higher education institutions.
And I think also my colleagues, Andris in the second panel and Linda in third, will definitely pick up the questions of resilience and the role of multilateral institutions. So we will continue the whole day, the discussions. But is there any burning question? Okay, please, Rasma. You have a mic in front of you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Rasma Pīpiķe. And I have to say I'm a dinosaur to civil society in Latvia. But currently I'm studying in RTU, PhD, and diversity management. Just using the opportunity, I want to raise our problems in Latvia. And the first thing I want to mention is, of course, I agree about human rights treaties, and that is the precondition for everybody. But how about Roma in Latvia? They face structural discrimination. Nobody just solves it. We know that. We can go to other countries, we can find a lot of problems, but Roma in Latvia, it's one of the first groups suffering the most. Sexual minorities in Latvia. Already for many years they are fighting for their rights. What do they get? All the time denial of their needs. Third group, women suffering domestic violence. Istanbul Convention, we use it as a buzzword, but as soon as it comes to the parliament in Latvia, it is somewhere lost in the bargains of politicians. So there is no question, it's just to mention for history that these are the problems we face here in Latvia, and it's not enough that we just mention human rights is like bottom line and that's it. There is a lot to speak about instrumentalization. How do we check if actually these rights are in place for those people? Because I can assure, 15 years ago, we spoke the same.
Very good question. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I want to respond, even though it's difficult to respond, because I deeply respect what you've just said about failure over years to bring about change, a point that could be made in so many different places, to be perfectly honest. If my agency existed for no other purpose than standing up for the Roma in the European Union, it would be a noble purpose. I normally avoid ranking problems, but as a group, the Roma community in Europe is the most marginal, the most victimized, the most excluded, and it's a scandal. It's actually it's an outrage that we have the persistence of the marginalization of Roma in the richest corner of the world. It's really an outrage. All I can tell you is that my agency is doing its best to constantly to make sure Roma is always in front of the policymakers, the situation, the plight, the need to give priority attention. And you probably know our surveys. We're every 2 years surveying the Roma community in Europe to make sure that policymakers everywhere cannot deny the facts. And you need to use our surveys. You need to use our data in your advocacy at the national level. I think our work is underused at the national level to bring about change. It's not just about us in Brussels. It's about you in all your various capitals. The same with regard to sexual minorities. We again, I'm sorry, you may say, what a feeble response from me. But again here, we're heavily invested in generating the data. The same point, generating the data about the lived reality. And we'll publish the third of our major surveys of the LGBTIQ+ communities in Europe in the coming months. Now, I'm not in a position, simply because I don't know, to give you the evidence right now, but what I can tell you, and I cannot speak about Latvia, is that my colleagues tell me they will indicate for the first time a notable improvement, at least with regard to lesbian and gay people. For trans and intersex, it's a very different story, but for lesbian and gay people, there appears to be an improvement. And by the way, I come from a country which is still scratching its head in wonder at how it went from criminalisation to marriage equality within a generation. You know, we sort of ask ourselves, how did that happen? But it's a reminder that change is possible. And violence against women, again, it's a problem right across Europe. Do what you can, get the Istanbul Convention ratified. That's a very important stepping stone but it's a really important stepping stone in indicating the commitment of our societies, our states and our governments to get serious about this chronic problem, which I think we swept under the carpet for far too long. But this is a moment. This is a sort of a Me Too type moment to actually get the attention. We saw that with racism after the killing of Mr. Floyd. That created a moment that we could capitalize on, which brought about serious change and commitment to combat racism in our societies. And I think on violence against women, perhaps we're in something like such a moment.
Wrapping up this first panel, we with the kind suggestion also by our parliamentarians and our CSOs are bringing different kind of recommendations to stakeholders out of this conference. So I would like to have the last round of maybe quite practical recommendations. Of course, we always can talk about, as we have been already commented, about concepts and so, and they mean different things in different countries. What could be your recommendations to national stakeholders, to Council of Europe? But I would like to add on one more little slight question, which we actually have left out, but I did it on purpose, about young people. Anna was talking about protests by Gen Z. We all are now saying young people, we need to educate them, they will change the world. What about other groups in the aging society? Maybe this message is contradictory. Maybe we need to invest in elderly nowadays. Or actually young people still, they feel, as you said, they need these skills to navigate in modern societies, right? So let's top on a specific angle also in these recommendations about your thoughts about young people in Europe nowadays. So, whoever wants to start to have the final comments, you can go. Okay, Ivo.
Yeah, thank you. It's in a way pretty broad, but still I think always you have to put an essence into that, and I think what we discussed today is also what concerns to international levels, and we have to always talk about the civic education. Yes, that's a way how to facilitate that. It's about, again, facilitation of dialogue and cooperation, and the way how there could be probably more of this peer cooperation between also member states, not just international organizations, member states, and definitely we talk again for technical assistance where it's possible on that side. And as always, as indicated, there is a monitoring again for those very, very hard issues which you raised and so, and then using again, as I initially said, certain stick and carrot principle as far as is possible. Yeah, at least raising dialogue with government and facilitate at least on the international community side. And finally, I think again what we mentioned is crisis resilient issues, because I think in coming times we'll face more and more, and crisis resilience will remain very important, because it will be always very good excuse not to do certain things. Yeah? And through maneuvering through this crisis, always is good you keep this light on and not to lose the principles in the process just for sake of some more important issues at that time. Concerning international level, again, that's a question about commitment for government on the standards and democracy principles. And there's a question to what extent civil society can monitor that and keep kind of government accountable, the same as international level. And finally, it's about engagement. Yes, it's both on political level and the level how the civil servants are interacting. And that's what could be very important for national decision makers. And again, civil society try to keep it responsible for that part. Yeah.
Maybe if I continue, two issues about the bigger picture, and then one concrete thing that I think is a good example of what to do. But we put a lot of weight on the trust, and we get quite good scores in Finland. But that's just the kind of, that's just if it's 66%, then there are a lot of people who trust, but then there is a lot of people who don't trust at all. And we should not just look at the kind of average figure, but we should try to concentrate on those who are trust less, and those are the less well-off, less educated, lower income. Those are the voices that we don't hear. And when we talk about young people, or if we talk about old people, or if we talk about disabled people, there are in these groups, there can be rich pensioners, but there can be really poorly off people, older people, and the young people the same. So we should not treat them as big groups, but also look at who inside those groups are the ones that we should really reach and hear and help and make their lives better. And there what we did, had this opportunity to work with one of the civil society organizations, the Diagonese Foundation in Finland. They did futures work with those people, drug addicts, all those kinds of people who are the most vulnerable in the Finnish society. And this material that we got to use in our when drafting our open government work was really, really important. And we've also been involved or used the material that has come from a civil society organization called Citizen Arena in Finland. Also, they have done futures work. So I think it's very important because, for instance, the Diakoness Foundation, they said that these people really want to speak about the future. Even though for some of them it's only a day long, the future, so they can only see for the next day. But it's very important to not just to discuss today's problems, but also what the future holds. So that's one concrete example we are trying to use more in the future. Thanks.
Practical stuff. Well, the first is stick together. I think it's critical to the success of civil society that you keep very closely allied with each other. I know there's the Civic Alliance here in this country. There are platforms developing around Europe, which I really welcome. There's a new one, the Human Rights Platform of Civil Society, that will be launched in Portugal next week. And these are really important. We run one. The Fundamental Rights Agency runs something called the Fundamental Rights Platform. It has nearly 1,000 organizations that are associated with it. Any organisation here that isn't, please have a look. And if you think it's a value for you, do join. It's another space to stick together, to be stronger. Listening. It's not a choice between listening to young people and listening to old people. It's about listening between the generations. And both are needed. Old people got massively ignored during COVID. And so they are just as entitled to be angry and a lack of trust as young people. But to listen, we have to create spaces. We have to make the effort of building respectful spaces to listen. So my agency, just to give an example, we will establish a youth advisory panel already before the end of this year, a structured space where young people will give us their views on what we're doing. And we hope that will improve how we work. And the last thing I want to say, and this is really the last thing, is you know, we got very gloomy this morning. We talked about polycrisis, the sense of stuff so bad it's unfixable. And I would urge that we be hopeful. We can't get out of the bed to do our work if we're not hopeful, if we do not believe we can actually make a difference. And I believe we can make a difference. I don't believe that that's naive. I don't believe that that's in any silly way idealistic. And in fact, when I was on my phone a minute ago, not to look at emails, but just to get accurate, a quote from Václav Havel. And I'd let my last words be his. Havel said, "Hope is not the conviction that something will turn out well, but the certainty that something makes sense, regardless of how it turns out." Thank you.
Anna, please.
So I'm gonna begin with what you already mentioned, that the young people have crucial role in building democracy, especially in Georgia. What we see is that young people, people under 30 and women are actually front runners of protest and all the democratic protests we have in Georgia. And as I mentioned, as you agree with, was that March protest was successful because young people were resilient. But one thing I need to remember was that after March protests, young Georgians were highly marginalized by Georgian authorities. Even the Prime Minister of Georgia called young people Satanists and radicals. And not to forget that currently 21 years old Lazare Grigoriadis, who was the participant of March protests, is in custody. And he was arrested, and the currently investigation is still ongoing without having any actual evidence that he actually committed any crime during the March protests. But as mentioned, as the young protesters were marginalized, he is a really great example of this marginalized community with his non-binary looking and some fake biography the government is trying to spread about him. So what I'm trying to say is that what we need to do as a civil society is to keep resilient and as like what we saw in March protest and what works really good in Georgian context and maybe in other contexts with the similar situation. Cooperation is civil society is extremely important. What in Georgia we believe and what is our national motto is unity makes strength. So we need to get together to respond to the problems we are facing as society and also as international society, and also involvement of international community is very important. Again, if we look at March protests, this protest was extremely successful because the international community responded to this process, unlike the other protests we had in Georgia in past years, which was also organized and joined by young people and civil society, but those protests were unsuccessful because those protests were completely ignored.
Thank you. No easy answers, right? Democracy is a process, step by step, together. But I think we had a fantastic panel with wide diversity of views, right? Theory, practice, different regions, and different levels of operations. I think they really, we should give them great applause. And also, I think we have perfect timing, right? And then that's also a good thing. So I'm happy to invite you for quite a long lunch to discuss among yourselves with panelists about those issues. So 12:30, we meet back here, and then my colleagues will take over more heated discussions. Thank you. Thank you for your questions also.